some examples. Hello?
I'm here.
Uh, video disappeared. Oh, there we go. Um, but it's in my car actually. Some examples of questions and stuff we talk about. Um, but they're, I guess, with the CBT, they're interested a lot in. I'll give them an example of a time where I feel a lot of anxiety or something, or yeah, and then kind of write down like what I felt and to what degree, and some associated thoughts that I had and all that. And so it's a lot of um, going back and referring to some old feelings that I had, I guess. And it takes me. I just feel like it takes me out of the present moment and forces me to think and feel, in a like a loser. Basically, it takes me out of the, what I'm trying to train, with your teachings and stuff, with Sati, and basically, I feel like it forces me to do the opposite a lot of the times, even though they're trying to teach me skills that I could use, I guess, in the present moment too. So, but I was just kind of wondering your thoughts on if they're compatible or not.
Well, ultimately, um, when psychology and the various psychologies, let us say, um, delve deeper than they have so far into the human mind, and that neuroscience and all of the other good ideas that have been around are incorporated into psychology, it will become more and more noble.
Okay.
Now, you talked about cognitive behavioral therapy and use the word the BA. And so there's a couple of things to say.
Mm-hmm.
One is that cognitive behavioral therapy seems to have gotten started um, uh, in I've forgotten the guy's name now. The It has to do with behavior. The word is behavior modification,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll think of the guy's name in a minute. But behavioral modification uh, actually is a solid step in the right direction, because the whole premise is that we are not stuck in our past, or that we are not predetermined, that our behavior can be modified. And by, let us say, extension of logic, given that most behavior is founded upon feelings, then a clear example of that is people behave angry and violent when they're feeling angry.
Mm-hmm.
And so cognitive behavioral therapy is, you can look at that word, and what it appears is that they have been taking some of the um, uh, teachings of the Buddha and incorporating it with, and I can't remember the guy's name, B.F. Skinner, who was
Mm-hmm.
doing behavioral modification, um, and that was the whole premise behind it. Now, in many cases, cognitive behavioral therapy has gotten into prisons, but what we have found about psychology from the very beginning with Freud, he had a nephew named Edward Bernays. And Edward Bernays, there is a group of videos on YouTube called The Century of the Self. And it would be very good if you would watch that whole series so that you can see basically what psychology has had as an effect upon a Western society in the past 100, let us say 120 years.
Okay.
All right. So the Century of the Self is about Edward Bernays and how he used Freudian psychology to come up with industrial psychology. Now, industrial psychology is actually the psychology that the industrialist will use to improve work. And so, with psychology in that regard and cognitive behavioral therapy, it has to do with um, the VA and various prison systems and that kind of thing is trying to change the behavior of the, let us call them clients or the prisoners or the VA, the veterans. They're trying to change their behavior. And by doing so, they're beginning or wanting to change some of the feelings. Now, the first thing that we should look at is that this whole idea or system is operated from the concept of the outside in. In other words, for the most part, both prisoners and VA have stress, and that stress in World War One was called shell shock, and nowadays it's called post-traumatic stress disorder, to where post-traumatic means that the trauma point is over now, but the people are still under a great deal of stress to the point that their life is disordered. And so the idea then is that we can get them to modify the way they deal with the stress. And maybe by doing so, that will begin to work with the stress itself. To where what we're actually doing, which is a more noble way, is to deal with the stress itself directly. That it doesn't have this outside therapist and the individual. It doesn't have the therapist-client relationship. That the relationship that is best done is at the relationship of, let us say, the teacher-student, but that the teacher's job is not to keep that system going of being the teacher with the student, but rather to allow the student with his own skills to come up to the level of the teacher, so that now both are just friends. That I would rather be your friend than your teacher. And that's not the system set up either in the prisons or in the VA under this system that they're called cognitive behavioral therapy. All right. Now, they do have a shot in the right direction with the word cognitive, because that is really what we're doing. We're cognizing, or we're actually beginning to recognize or to see clearly what's going on. Now, it is old psychology to dwell in the past. The psychologists call this psychological archaeology. And that one of the things that would happen would be that the people would remember something from their childhood or whatever to try to put things together of why I am like I am.
Right.
All right. Well, I am like I am only right now. And that I will be like this next time because I'm in the habit of being like this. But that post, or let us say that stress that happened in childhood, does not fix and determine, just like in the military, being under stress in battle does not necessarily determine the future. That in fact, you can take the man out of Afghanistan and he can stop reacting as if he's still in Afghanistan. You've heard the saying, in fact, this is a good one. You can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
Do you think it's true?
No.
No,
Not with
it's
the no.
not true. No, it's not really true. It is, let us say, factually true in many cases that when young men do go out of the South into the city, that uh, in the beginning they can't. But an example would be television announcers who are going to have to speak flat American, broad American English, have to stop using their Bostonian accent if they come from Boston.
Mm.
Okay, so we can train the mind. Or the boy that's raised in rural Texas or South Carolina can, in fact, go to New York City and learn to become the way that they are in New York. That's not recommended, but it's possible that he can, in fact, hide his past by, let us say, dropping it. And so, back to the story about the psychological archaeology, here's a story that the guy goes to the psychotherapist with anger issues. That, in fact, in many cases, he just blows up and becomes an asshole. So, after several months of therapy, he and the therapist, he tells the story that when he was 4 years old, his mom gave him a spanking. And so he and the therapist decide, oh, that he's got anger issues now because of the trauma of getting spanked. And then they stop there. If they'd gone a little bit further into it, they may have figured out that the boy got his spanking because he was an asshole. That going back and looking for cause effect relationships can be quite complicated. And in fact, it doesn't matter how things got started. That's a
Yeah.
really interesting point, is it doesn't matter how things got started. Um, because once they're already in motion, then we've got to deal with the situation as it is now. For instance, if you're in a snowslide or an avalanche and you're at the bottom of the mountain and you see the avalanche coming, you need to do one thing and one thing only, and that is get out of the way of it. But if you've got your camera rolling and whatnot, and you're trying to figure out how this avalanche got started, you're not going to get a good answer. You're going to get buried under the answer. That's what. And so there is some issues about cognitive behavioral therapy, but it might be of some value. It depends upon how much psychological archaeology that's done. If it's done only in the way of let's get over that, then it has some value. But mostly what it's done is finding a way of laying blame. For instance, oh, I'm an angry man now because my mama treated me badly when I was 4. Therefore, it's okay for me to continue to be angry. In other words, it's her fault. But within the concept of the teachings of the Buddha, the noble teaching is that everyone has to take full responsibility for their own feelings, their own thoughts, their own behavior right now. That we cannot fix the past, not really. We can't do it. It's over. If that cup falls off the table and crashes on the floor, the only thing we can do is pick up the mess. We cannot put the cup back together again in the condition it was before it fell off. And sometimes they have really silly stories on movies and television about that the real cat got lost. And so they try to bring in a substitute cat. And invariably, no matter what they do with it, they can dye its hair, give it a haircut or whatever. The owner is going to know this is not that cat. That cat is not this one. And so we cannot, in fact, repair the past. It's over. And yet, these groups that are looking for it in the sense of post-traumatic stress disorder, it was actually probably more accurate to call it shell shock. Because the post-traumatic stress disorder actually is now intent on looking in the past to see that trauma rather than merely getting over it. Now, there are other things other than psychological archaeology that the psychologists have had to deal with. One of them was anger management in the 1970s when I was in training. There was equipment that was available. There was, in fact, a kind of small industry going where they would have batons, boxing gloves, a lot of padded war equipment so that people could have at it with each other in a group. Another example of that is pounding the pillow, that I hate my mom, so here, take this pillow and pound this invisible mom here. This also came out of Fritz Perl's concept of the empty chair, of having a third chair brought up and say, okay, well, don't tell me what you want to tell me about your mom. Imagine that mom's right here in this chair. Tell her all about it. This was designed to bring up emotions, to bring up feelings. And in fact, many therapists prided themselves on how bad they could get their clients to feel during the session. They would always have a box of Kleenexes for the girls and a mallet for the boys, something to pound on. Okay? So this is not what we're doing here. We're not trying to work with the gross, but in the teachings of the Buddha, we're actually looking at the subtle. An example of that would be that the definition of the word dukkha has been translated into English to our society, and for whatever reasons, is they translate it as suffering. Well, suffering is gross. But dukkha is better defined by using the word unsatisfying, not satisfactory. Well, that can be very subtle. And that it's these subtle things that come up that if we dwell on them, we'll get them going and bring them up. That always feelings start very, very small, very subtly, but they grow sometimes very quickly. And so what we're going to be working with is to go for a more and more subtle way of doing things. rather than staying at the level of gross. And by the way, those batons and uh, pounding the pillow and doing that kind of stuff has lost favor in the past 40 years from the psychologists, because what was happening is that people who were, let us say, um, capable of living in the world, but they just felt really bad about it. They go to the therapist, they start bringing the anger up, and now they leave the psychologist's office with both the stirred up anger and permission that it's okay to express the anger. And so they go out in the world acting even more angry than they did, thinking that they're going to get it out of their system.
Mm.
In fact, they're not going to get it out of their system. What they're doing now is repeating an old bad habit, making it even more ingrained. And they brought it up to the surface rather than leaving it as something subtle. So, what the whole point of anapanasati is to start with the gross, which is actually quite subtle in and of itself, is the breath. But it is something gross, and that we can continue to keep paying attention to the breath. And so we're beginning to develop sati while breathing, which means that we're becoming watchful of the breath. We know that we know whether we're breathing in or breathing out. And this is the very first step of anapanasati, because as you'll probably recognize, that that's actually, even at the gross level of the breath, it's hard to keep the mind focused on it, that the mind will wander away. Well, that wandering away is actually the mind in free association. And in the time of the Buddha, one of the trainings that he had as a prince was he was involved with elephant training. And so the Buddha uses elephants as an example on many things. And one of the qualities is that the elephant, if it is able to get free from its, they would put a big post in the ground, a big tree stump or whatever, and then they would use the vines, the cords, the ropes that they had. They didn't have steel chains in those days. And so by the elephant swinging his left hind foot, that's where they would always attack, assuming that the elephant was always right-handed.
Mm.
And so, but the elephant would swing that hind leg, and every time that he would put more and more force on it, he could break free. And so the breaking free elephant, where does he go?
Back where it came from.
Exactly, exactly. It always keeps going back where he came from. So the animal trainers, they know exactly where to go get that elephant when he breaks free.
Mm.
And then and the environment, so that if they caught him in this particular area, all they have to do is just go search that area, and they'll probably find him again.
Mm.
And after he gets free several times, he begins to stop working so hard at getting free, and he kind of just stays there. This is the first training of the elephants in those days. They expected the elephant to be able to break free.
Mm.
And then they would go catch him again and bring him back. And he would break free again, and would bring him back over and over and over again until the animal settles down. This is, in fact, what anapanasati is we keep bringing the mind back and tethering it to the breath, and it breaks away and goes away, and we keep bringing it back and bringing it back and bringing it back. And with that bringing back, that's the sati. And in fact, that's the training that we're working on, is to keep remembering what's happening in this present moment. Now, in the beginning, all that we have to do is to watch the breath. That's the first instruction. But very quickly, students recognize, hey, I can watch the breath, but the mind is still wandering around. And so now we begin to pay attention to, okay, well, now that we're watching the breath and continue to watch the breath, and then it wanders away. Basically, what it wanders away means is that the thoughts that were already there kind of take over, and we kind of forget about the breath. And now the only thing that's happening are those wandering thoughts. And so the second thing that we're going to start working with is to get those wandering thoughts a bit under control by choosing or deciding what kind of thoughts we're going to allow. And so we're going to say, okay, we're going to put a guard at the door saying that we're only going to allow wholesome thoughts and not allow unwholesome thoughts while we're watching the breath. Well, what happens is that we begin to understand that the unwholesome thoughts are that which will drag us away from the breath, but wholesome thoughts actually promote us being here now with the breath.
Mm.
And so thoughts of this present moment, thoughts about the breath. If we're thinking about the breath while we're monitoring or watching the breath, then those are the kind of thoughts that will help us stay attuned to the breath and the breathing in this moment, and also begin to pay more attention to not just the breathing itself, but other things that are associated with the senses. In that way, we begin to get in touch with the body. We begin to feel and experience the body. And as we do so, we begin to expand our awareness in this present moment. Well, the next thing that will happen is that we begin to understand that, not just thoughts are arising and not just sensations of the body, but feelings are also arising. And they're also arising kind of in the background. And so this is the point in which we start to say, okay, if I'm going to be guarding the mind and the thoughts, we should also be able to start guarding the mind for the feelings and to make sure that the kind of feelings that we have are the kind of feelings we want to have, as opposed to having the kind of feelings that we don't want to have.
Mm.
Okay. And here we go with that thought and the feeling of satisfaction. The thought and feeling of this is pleasurable. This is a good moment. This is a zippity doo-dah moment. I
Yeah.
feel really good right now. So, if cognitive behavioral therapy is pulling you in that direction, then that's the good part. But if it keeps the student off in the past, trying to blame the trauma of his Afghanistan or the trauma of his childhood before he went to prison, then we're not going to get very far. That we need, in fact, to move the student away from that. Clear examples that the VA has had to deal with is that daddy came home from the war, he's good, everything looks happy. He's so happy to be with his family. And after a few weeks, he's sleeping in bed, and little Johnny comes to wake daddy up. But in that wake up, little Johnny is first off thrown in the air, grabbed by the throat, pounded on the bed, and now he's being choked to death while daddy is in the process of waking up. To recognize, why am I doing this to my own son? Oh, it's because when little Johnny came in and disturbed him, that caused the dream state, and the dreams that he began to have were the dreams of Afghanistan or wherever his duty was. And so now he's in survival mode, not fully awake, but he's still fighting. He's still good to go. He's still a good soldier inside. Okay.
Right.
They call this post-traumatic stress disorder, and I can understand why they do. But basically what it means is the guy, number one, needs to learn how to sleep better. And number two, that this is not an issue of what happened in Afghanistan. This is an issue of what happened right then when he's choking his son, because he's not mindful, he's not awake that he is in fact really caught in and lost in the past. And so if cognitive behavioral therapy is actually doing its job, it's to wake people up to recognize you are not the past. That if you wake up, you can get away from the past, but only if we are asleep or not mindful, or let us say just living in the habit. Then that habit that we developed over the course of our lifetime, and sometimes heavily modified through these traumatic adult situations, that then determines a new course or a new destiny or a new providence. This is what we mean by predetermination, that most people live their lives in already determined, and that generally the society supports that, in the sense of the society tells you as a little kid, okay, you got to go to school. And so the kid goes to school. He doesn't like it. In a way, going to school is a stressful situation. And in that regard, everyone who's gotten a public education in the West, or sometimes even in private schools, are worse. I hear the Catholic schools of the old days are really tough. And a lot of people grew up under the stress, so that everyone would have post-traumatic stress. And so the word that we reserve for post-traumatic stress disorder generally has to do with something really, really stressful that happened in the adult, to where everyone has a whole lot of stress built up over time because of the more and more ingrained habits of not liking school. That if the number one job of the beginning teachers and the number one job of every teacher was to get the student to like the subject that we're teaching right now, then those kids will do a whole lot better. But no, many teachers still have the idea, oh no, you're here in this class, you do what I tell you to do. At the end of the semester, I'll give you a grade, and that's all the benefit you're going to get out of it, is your good grade. You take that test and make a high score, and I get more money, and you get a good grade, but that's all you get. And so the kid learns it, but he only learns it temporarily. He doesn't learn it because he likes it. So we're all under stress. And doing psychological archaeology is only good up to a point. And the point would be that when I say that kids don't like to go to school, you can reminisce a bit and say, yeah, I remember I didn't like to go to school either. But that's as far as it needs to go. Or we can say to the guy who was in Afghanistan, yeah, you got really stressed out in Afghanistan. And he has a couple of memories and say, yeah, I really got stressed in Afghanistan. The next thing the therapist should say, okay, you're not in Afghanistan now. Stop behaving and feeling like you were in Afghanistan. Times have changed. It's time for you to change too. We are not predetermined or predestined to behave in a certain way, which leads to one of my jokes.
Okay.
There is, okay. You know that there is a big conflict within Christianity about free will.
Yeah.
Do we have free will or do we not have free will? And many of them will come up to say, well, I have free will because God made me have it. I have free will because I have to have it. I don't have any choice about it. So by saying that he has free will, he's just kind of proven that he doesn't.
Right.
Okay. But there's another way of looking at it, and this is the way that I would look, and that is, we have will. It's not free. It's expensive.
Right. Yeah. I think you told me this one before.
Yeah, okay. It is expensive. Why is it expensive? Is because we have to take the effort to get out of the fact that we don't have free will because we are, um, let us say, in the habit of doing things in a certain way, and so we don't have any will over that. But we can say, no, I'm now going to take the effort that it does take
Yeah.
to, to come out of that and to live our lives correctly. So part of the effort is going from the gross, the breathing, down to more subtle, the thoughts, down to even more subtle levels, the feelings, so that we begin to get in touch with actually how we feel at a very basic level. And how we feel at a very basic level is generally broken down into three groups. One, I like it. Two, I don't like it. And number three is I'm not sure whether I like it or not, or I both like it and not like it,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm confused. I haven't made up my mind yet whether I should like it. An example of that would be that let us say that the guards or the military people are on a very high ridge looking down into the valley, their own guard. And when they see someone coming into the valley, they get very curious. Who is this? Is this friend or foe? Do I like it or do I not like it? Well, in the beginning, they don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
so they become extraordinarily curious about who is this that's coming. Well, in a way, everything that comes your way, we see that way. In the beginning, we may not quite understand what it is. And sometimes that not understanding what it is will stay with us. It will stay with us in the sense of doubt. We're not sure what it is. That can grow into fear. We don't know what it is, and therefore we don't know whether it's dangerous or not. Let's take the safe way out and consider it dangerous. So let's go ahead and attack whoever it is in the valley. We don't know who they are, but they might be dangerous. And so let's start shooting at them now. We don't even have to wait until we figure out whether they're a friend or not. We'll just start shooting. Well, you see, that happened a lot in Afghanistan because it was really hard for them to figure out is this friend or foe. And they got really confused. And with that confusion comes fear. Well, the same thing then is happening almost all the time. Someone comes into the yard and we don't know who it is. We get on alert. Or even sometimes a thought will come in and we don't know whether we like that thought or not. And so we become confused. Like thoughts of anapanasati can put people into a great state of confusion
Mm-hmm.
because they don't understand what it is yet, but they want to know. Now, generally, this state of confusion then will lead to fears and doubts. With anapanasati, doubt about am I practicing right? Doubt about can I do it? Doubt about um, am I following directions correctly? And all of that kind of stuff. But those kinds of doubts will also be there in the therapy sessions for the cognitive behavioral therapist. Now, remember that the therapists themselves are trained within a certain style, but that the therapists themselves are not free from stress.
Right. Yeah.
That you can, in fact, talk to the therapist in that place and ask them, are they completely free from stress? And every one of them will more than likely have to admit that no, they're still all stressed out. And the answer would be then, well, maybe I should be your therapist then, because I'm not always stressed out. I found a way to not be so stressed out.
Yeah.
By the way, I know of exactly one example of that. His name is Greg. I won't tell you too much about him other than I think he's dead now.
Mm.
But when he was in Thailand several years ago, that was his intention, was to go back to VA because the amount of money that he got from the VA was dependent upon whether or not he went to the therapy sessions.
Mm.
And so reluctantly, he left Thailand. He left Wat Suan Mok to go back to those therapy sessions. But his intention was to go straighten them out, to come to a place where there's no reason to have stress. Well, the thing about bringing the stress up is not necessarily the best way to deal with it, because if you keep bringing it up and reminding yourself and feeling stressed and whatnot like that, that's just continuing the habits of it. That we need to have a different kind of cognitive therapy, and that cognitive is in this case to recognize, and the word would be sati, to remember it, to recognize it, to see it. And if that's the case of what they're teaching, then they're teaching the right thing, is to recognize that stress when it comes up. And the sooner you recognize it, the easier it is to deal with it.
Yeah. See, they are using that. What do you call it? Psychological archaeology. Archaeology. Why can I not think of the word right now?
Psychological archaeology, yes,
Right. Yeah. They are using that, but not very far in the past. And it seems only used as an example to teach me skills how I can react differently in the future. Or
Hang on a second. Pumpui. Hey! So, there's somebody in the yard they don't like. He's here to clean up. You stop. So, go ahead.
So yeah, they
You're
do use
talking
a
about
psychological
psychological
archaeology.
archaeology.
Yeah. But it seems only to use that as an example to teach me new skills and how to react to those types of situations in the future. Um, so yeah, but it does require me to recall the past and to feel the way I felt in the past. And right. So it always brings me out of the present moment, usually into feeling a lot of anxiety and that of a loser. So I just don't that's what's brought up a lot of doubt with that type of therapy is it's always every time I go to therapy, I end up feeling worse usually, and then I have to use anapanasati to to feel good again. So
Mm-hmm.
So,
I understand exactly. Um, Let us say that you're at point A and your intention is to go to point B, but that the directions say you go opposite of that. So if you want to go from here to here, going in that direction doesn't actually look productive.
hmm
In other words, if you're here to be free from anxiety, then why would you want to then to go back and experience that anxiety other than, let's basically say, to get a load of it, to recognize it, to see it.
mm,
So now that you've got that anxiety, okay, so the distinction would be here is that um, in the cognitive behavioral therapy, they're trying to get you to feel bad in order to teach you a lesson about feeling bad, to where here we're actually intentionally working on feeling good, knowing that the bad feelings are going to come up. That's your habit. You can't
right,
avoid them.
exactly. Yeah.
And so, because you can't avoid them, they're going to come up. Now is the time to experience them, but only in the sense of letting them go. But we can see it. If we recognize, for instance, if we got a great big pile of mess in our hand, let us say that it's a piece of bad fruit that's full of animals. But the original thought is this is a good piece of fruit. And so I'm going to pick it up and carry it with me. And then you find uh, by carrying it that it's got worms in it, and the worms start coming out while you're carrying it, and you recognize that, then you want to throw it down.
mm,
Okay. So we don't want to have it. Once we see what it is, we decide that, oh, that's dukkha. That's unsatisfying. That's unsatisfactory. That worm actually does own that piece of fruit now. It's not mine. I thought it was mine, but it's not. It belongs to the worm. And so it is unsatisfying. It is unsatisfactory. So we let it go. So if we can do that on a regular basis, then we're creating new habits so that we spend more and more time in satisfaction and less time in carrying around stuff that is unsatisfying while we think that it is satisfying. And then we become disappointed that everything ultimately is unsatisfactory until we know how to see things correctly. And so I would say don't spend time feeling depressed. If they want to bring something up, say, yeah, I remember that, but I don't want to feel that way right now.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's how I feel a lot when, because they'll try to, they really try to push me into feeling like that, and I don't want to feel like that. And
I don't blame you. I don't want to feel like that either. I've had a stress. I know what it's like. And when it does come, I'm not saying I'm completely free from it, but when it does come, I see it. There you are again. And so this is the way to start approaching it, that you can remember. In fact, in most cases, you can't help but remember because that stuff's just there. But you don't have to dwell in it. You don't have to get stuck in it. You don't have to be confused by it. And you certainly don't have to be stressed out with it. You can
Mhm.
say, yeah, that was stress, but I'm in the past. This present moment, I'm in therapy sitting here. I am not out on the battlefield.
No,
And
in the
so I
same,
can feel the way that I want to feel.
Now, in the same way, though, is in Anapanasati by pushing those bad thoughts and feelings aside. Now, is that I can't think of the word right now, but is that kind of doing the opposite and avoiding problems that we should be facing?
Ah, but if that's actually, here's you just struck on something that's extremely important.
Oh, okay.
Avoiding problems uh, that you should be facing. In fact, maybe the problem, let us say that the imagination of the problem is that the problem is a big problem and it should be faced.
Mm,
Going at suffering as if it were, dukkha, as if it were suffering. And that you've got to stop suffering by facing your suffering. Oh no, wait a minute, wait a minute. Um, First off, we're looking at very subtle things, not very gross things.
okay.
So another way of saying it is, hey, there are no problems for me to be facing. So why am I bringing up and making a problem that uh, that I should face now rather than face it later, when in fact there's no problem much to face? Are we not, in fact, by facing these problems now, manufacturing these problems now?
Right. Okay.
And if we're not manufacturing problems now, then maybe we don't have to manufacture problems later. You see, it is a good idea for the guys who are in stress to recognize that their stress came from, I'm using the word Afghanistan, you know what I'm talking about. Because
Yeah.
if you were a World War II guy, you'd still have the same problem, but it would be because of below wood or something. No, that's World War One. But in any case, it's a good point for guys to recognize, number one, that they are under stress, but number two, because it happened in the past and I'm living in the past. And that the present anxiety that I have is because of old, bad, past experiences that I don't need to work with.
So
So there's no
it's
reason for you to be, even when you bring it up.
mhm.
Here's something. Even if you bring up the old past bad experience, doesn't mean that you have to have the feelings now that you had then. You can, in fact, remember a really tragic situation and feel really good in the present moment.
Mhm.
That yes, you had that tragedy, and yes, you felt very bad when that tragedy happened in a short time afterwards. But remembering that tragedy doesn't mean that you have to remember the feelings also, that you can change the way that you feel about it. And so you can choose when you're reminiscing, when they ask you to reminisce, you can say, ah, yeah, I remember that incoming. I saw that big old thing coming right here and it blew up right in my face and tore up half my body. Ha ha. Because I went to VA and they put me back together again. Thank you very much.
Okay. I imagine it takes quite a bit of practice to get to that point, but
Okay, well, all right. Now you know what you need to practice on, feeling good, even though there are thoughts of the past. Because you see, even though I spent a little bit of time talking about the incoming getting blown up, the real point is that I'm over that now. And so dwell on throwing that out. I'm not there anymore. I'm here now, and here now is quite nice. I'm satisfied with it.
okay. So that basically, there's no value in ever investigating the past, or I remember, okay, so for example, there was a moment when I was talking to my therapist recently where I was feeling a lot of anxiety because it was after, recalling one of these past events. And I could feel the pressure in my head, like that instinctual protecting of the neck and the head that we talked about. I could
Mm-hmm.
feel the muscles tightening and stuff. And so my therapist was really interested in investigating further into, into why I was feeling this way and all that. Um, but you're saying what's really important is just at that point is to just practice anapanasati and gladden the mind and get back into a state of joy and happiness, and it's really not important to recall and
I would say
investigate
it like
what
this: rather than it's important to recall it, I would go so far as to say you can't help but recall it.
happened. Yeah,
That it's
yeah,
going to come up from time to time. There's going to be triggers, there's going to be memories, there's going to be memorabilia. You might see a photograph, and that photograph then gives you a thought, and then another thought, and now you're back on the battlefield. Now you're getting the hell blown out of you. Okay, and so that's just it. It goes like that. That's how the mind works. And not only that, but there is a survival mechanism built in that we call it the self-preservation instinct, but a better way of talking about it is an organization or an organism protection instinct. Without that, life wouldn't exist, or it would exist in very primitive forms. It's only because of this ingrown program to protect the self. This gives us a lot of false positives. Why? Because if you see a rustle in the woods and two of you are out there, and one of them immediately starts takes off and runs away, and the other one turns around to see what it was, it may in fact be his daughter.
mm,
Okay, so the one who ran away, that way he saw it as a false positive because he thought that it was a predator, and in fact it was benign.
mm,
But he chose out of fear. He didn't know what it was, and so he ran. Now, let's look at it this way. Suppose it was a predator. Guess who gets eaten?
right. The one who's stuck around to figure out what it
Right, the
was.
one who wanted this, right, the curious one. Curiosity killed that cat. And so the one who has the false positive, oh, I don't know, it may be dangerous. I'm going to treat it like it's dangerous, actually is a survival mechanism. It worked well. It still works well in certain cases, but by and large, right now, your life is not life full of danger. Maybe in Afghanistan, the danger was high. Everybody had to be on great alert.
Hmm.
But right now, you don't have to be on that kind of alert. Things are not dangerous. And we can see that with the cognitive part of the mind. We can see that with the frontal cortex,
Mm.
to where it is the reptilian brain that is the protection mechanism. And so what we do is we remember the stress, and then we start to feel stressed out again, is because the reptilian part of the mind is in operation. We need to take a few deep breaths to get the frontal cortex operating so that we can recognize, wait a minute, I'm safe. There's nothing to
Mm.
fear here. What is this anxiety that I'm having? Let me take a deep breath and breathe into that so that I can feel good. I don't have to
Mm.
feel anxiety because I am in the habit of feeling anxiety, but I have to see it because it'll creep up on you.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because when you're in a state of anxiety, you're also not thinking as clearly as when you're not in a state of anxiety, but it seems that therapists are interested in talking to you when you're in a state of anxiety, but it's kind of
If
counterproductive
that's
because
if he's a good therapist, he'll tell you, "Hey, man, breathe, take a deep breath."
yeah.
Has any therapist ever told you that?
Absolutely not.
Oh my,
I've, I've had
oh
quite a few.
my. Yes, take a deep breath, get some oxygen going, break that anxiety up, change your blood chemistry a bit.
Mhm.
So that anxiety then that comes up, we either do things to make it bigger, shutting down, talking about it, going back and reliving the experience, bringing on the anxiety, or we can take a deep breath and say, "Yeah, I remember that that happened, but I choose now to come out of that anxiety. At that point of the stress, I didn't have a choice about it. But now I do have a choice. If I can remember, if
Hmm.
I can cognize a bit, I can recognize right now I don't have to feel bad. I can feel good. My choice. Everything is your choice. Here's an interesting point, and that is that the way that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and the way that the Buddha looked at karma is in fact post-traumatic stress disorder. That the actions of our past gave results in the past, and so we get into that cycle of doing this and getting this result over and over and over again. Dwelling in anxiety, thinking about the past, for instance, brings up anxiety and keeps the thing alive. That's karma. And the cycle that it's in is called samsara. And your choice is to break that up. Now, that's also the intention of the psychologists. They just don't go right after it. They think that, though, they got to bring it up and get you really all messed up before they can talk you out of it.
Hmm.
But you don't have to do that. You can have those traumatic memories without feeling the trauma. So, in fact, if that's what they're doing in the session for you, this is the right time to practice what I'm talking about. That just because you're remembering a bad thing that happened doesn't mean you have to feel bad right now. That you can
Okay.
get over it. You can let go of it. You can remember it, but you don't have to fall into that hole every time that hole appears. This is basically what Greg wanted to change about the cognitive behavioral therapy that he had in LA.
Mm.
Was to say, hey, you don't have to stay there. You can come out of that hole. In fact, the best thing to do is to see the hole coming and step aside without falling into it. So, does this answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. Well, next time we'll talk about some of the details of what we've been talking about in general today. And that is, the first thing is the gross, or the big is to talk about the breathing. Then we begin to work with the thoughts, and eventually we begin to work with the feelings, because the feelings often are quite subtle until they grab you by the throat. They sneak
Mm-hmm.
up on you and then they grab you. So we're going to
Mm-hmm.
start working with them when they're sneaking up on you before they
Okay.
grab you.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. When was the last time you had a session with the cognitive behavioral therapy?
um, Not this past Monday, but Tuesday, but the Tuesday before that. So I think I meet with them next Tuesday.
All right. Well, the next time you have the therapy, waltz in there singing zippity doo dah, zippity a. I got my arm blown off, but that was a wonderful day.
Yeah, I will. I won't, I won't let them bring me down.
Yeah, right, right. Oh, there that that's actually uh, a Latin phrase that is
What's
all.
that?
I forgot the Latin itself, but it's translated is "Don't let the word is basically carburum, but it's meant in the sense like sandpaper.
Hmm.
And you talked about rubbing the wrong. Don't let those uh, the sandpaper get you down. Don't let the way that it's translated is don't let the bastards get you down.
Mm, I won't.
Okay. Remember, you don't have to step in the holes that they're trying to remind you of.
Right. Okay. That's a good way to think about it too.
Excellent. Well, good luck with that. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you. Have a good rest of your
All right. Great. I'd like to hear about
day. Bye.
it. See you. Okay. Bye bye.